book I'm going to look at today is one that, frankly, I should have read some years ago. This is it. It's called Catching a Serial Killer. And it's by former Detective Superintendent Stephen Fulcher. And the reason I should have read this ages ago, because it tells the story of a killer who was stalking the streets of Swindon, where I live. And as an investigative journalist full-time in the past, before I ran my own business, this is the kind of story I would have been following very closely. And I remember this happening. I remember the abduction of a lady in Swindon called Sian O'Callaghan, and all the coverage that followed. And this person, whose name I won't mention, was the killer. And this guy whose back you can see, this is the person you should be concentrating on here. His name is Steve Fulcher. And he was the guy who set out to catch this killer. And he did catch the killer. And this book came out in about 2017. But Steve Fulcher paid a very high price for catching this killer. It was deemed that he'd broken police rules in catching the killer. I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs, you'd have to read it in the book. And for that reason, he lost his career and his job. Now, at the time this was happening, Sian was killed, I think, in 2002. At the time this was happening, I wasn't covering this story. I was working as a full-time journalist in television. Obviously, I was fully aware of it, and I knew my colleagues in different parts of the media were covering this story. So I had an awareness of it, and as any other citizen of Swindon would, and was aware of the fear that was in the town, that there was a killer on the loose. And it took several days before Sian O'Callaghan's body was found. But obviously, we had no idea of everything that was going on behind the scenes. And I didn't know any of the characters caught up with this. I didn't know Sian O'Callaghan, I don't know her family. I didn't know Becky Godden Edwards, the second victim, and I didn't know her family. I didn't know Steve Fulcher, and I didn't know the killer. So I didn't know any of these people. Now I do. I met Karen Edwards, Becky Godden Edwards' mum, in the Brunel Centre in Swindon when she was having a petition done. She was gathering thousands and thousands of signatures to get justice for her daughter Becky, and also to help Steve Fulcher when it was deemed he had broken the rules in catching a killer. And funnily enough, in the last few months, by accident, coincidence, whatever you want to call it, I've got to know Steve Fulcher for an entirely different reason. And I chatted to him about the case and the impact on his life. He is now working. He's no longer a serving police officer, though he gave 30 years of his life to serve in the police. And I thought, well, I'm going to get this book and read it from Steve's point of view, read what happened from Steve's point of view, which I have now done. And I believe if you're in the Swindon area, if you live here, or if you're interested in stories like this, real life stories, then read this book. Because it taught me something important, something I already knew actually as a journalist. There are rules and there are structures in life that have to be followed. And of course, the most ancient one, I guess, that we all know is the Ten Commandments. There are rules that we have to follow. And I've always thought the Ten Commandments wasn't really about finger pointing and what you should do. Actually, what they are is a recipe for happiness. If you follow these general tenets, then you'll lead a happy life. And there are rules all throughout our lives, but rules and rule books and guidance aren't always right. Have you ever heard of the phrase exception to the rule? An investigative journalist like me, when I used to do it full time back in the day, we always looked at those things where the law was an ass, where the rules were ridiculous, where the rules were immoral, unethical. And this is one of those cases where someone broke the rules that existed, and in doing so he caught a killer and he brought two girls home to their parents. And you have to ask yourself when you read a book like this, what would you have done in Steve Fulcher's shoes? Would you have done as he did and risked everything and therefore lost everything? Or would you have done something different and allowed a man like this to go free? These are the kind of moral questions that this book throws up. This book was turned into a TV dramatisation called Confession, where Steve's role in it was played by the actor Martin Freeman. If you look it up on ITV Hub, you can see it. But for these reasons alone, you should read this book. And I've now gone on to read, and I'll review on another day, the book by Karen Edwards, a Swindon resident, about her daughter Becky, who was killed by this man. I think there's much more on this story to come. Check it out.
That's it for this week. Please subscribe and hit the little bell for notifications.